Hey guys! So today you and I are going to talk about ADRs. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, hi Frederick, as a software developer, do you maintain architecture decision records or ADRs? If not, how are you able to deep dive into poorly documented spaghetti code? I'm a professional. I'd like to think so at the very least. So here is my take on ADRs. Guys, ADRs is not something that you write in order to assert that you should be using a linter or to assert how a module should be written or so forth and so forth. The reason why I don't believe that is because the problem fundamentally with ADRs is that what will happen very quickly is that it's going to be very difficult for you to keep track of all the decisions that you have made, because what's the scope for an ADR? What level of a decision do you have to be at in order for an ADR to make sense? Is it single quotes, double quotes? Is it we should use microservices or monoliths? Is it monorepo or regular repos? Where does that line go? And here comes the next question. What does that matter if the next person who comes along who has enough authority to change their mind and they have a preference go and kind of go and say, yeah, there's an ADR here, but this is clearly wrong, so I'm going to do my own thing. And all of a sudden your ADR is no longer valid for anything but historical records of how something was. This is an example, I argue, of where the idea of the value that you are getting is higher than the actual value. Let me explain, because I'm not saying that ADRs are bad. I'm saying that you have to understand how to effectively solve a problem, and this is not the way that you are going to solve that problem. So, the thing that we are trying to achieve is that we are trying to achieve, as you described here, how do you find something in difficult spaghetti code? As I said, you have to be a professional. The reason why I say that is because if I give you a challenge right now, if you try to write a single piece of documentation that will perfectly make everybody understand what all that spaghetti code is doing, even if you document it, they will not be able to figure it out with just the ADR. That's what I'm saying. It is the idea is the same. I've had this conversation 100 times. Someone wants a flow diagram over an enterprise, like an enterprise architecture diagram, and I go, you can basically just throw that out the window. Because depending on how big it is, it depends on the level, of course, it has already changed by the time you finish writing it. You are trying to get control over something that is bigger than your mind can hold at any given time. Guys, I have ADR lists that I work with, like I have coworkers and so forth. Like the thing that happens is what happens every single time. It's the same thing that happens with Confluence. It's the same thing. It's a workflow that some people really swear by, but the practical value of it is always something that I will touch on as well. But what happens is always the same. You get 100 documents that nobody reads, apart from the people who were involved in those conversations. And the reason why this happens is usually that you get to a team or a situation where you don't have any documentation, and then people who feel frustrated over that they don't understand, and they feel frustrated over that they can't get meaningful things done, and they want an easier time figuring out how to learn how to use the system. Now they want you to write the documentation, but as I said, even if you wrote the documentation, it's unlikely that depending on the scope of things, it's unlikely that they're actually going to learn anything about it. And this is the thing that I usually tell people when they start, especially in management, when they talk about ADR, especially middle management and these sort of tech gurus and staff engineers. The thing that is happening is that they are projecting their own ignorance onto the problem. They're basically asking people to document something so that they feel that they can understand it, but true understanding would come if they actually sat down and understood the code itself. Because if you have poorly documented spaghetti code, an ADR will not fix that. But if you have really well maintained, structured code that follows basic design principles that a classic one is the archetypes of Java, like archetypes of projects or .NET or something like that, then you don't even need the ADR. because you have this, your understanding of how the system works comes from the fact that you understand how to do that level of development, and that means that you as a professional will understand, oh, okay, they made these decisions, they're using this tech, they're using that stack, because you know, you're their blood, you know how these sorts of things work. Similar to, nobody's going to go and read the entire law book every time you go out on the street. Even if I'm visiting a foreign country, I'm not going to read up on every law that they have just so that I can cross the street without fear of being, incarcerated. It's the same principle. There are principles that are always true, and if you have those in place, most of the value that you have from an ADR goes away. The time an ADR makes a lot of sense is when you're trying to align people on a standard. That's different. That's a whole different ball game. You see, the problem with aligning people on standards is that everybody needs to know that something is a standard, and everybody has to feel as if this has been discussed, and it has to feel official because of the thing that I said earlier. You see, the second someone else comes and says, I have this conversation 100 times, should we use a classic one is monorepo versus regular repo, like a not monorepo. And I go, well, I would suggest we continue using the thing that we have. And people will continuously question me over and over on these sorts of topics, like over and over, like just endlessly. And this is the problem, because every time anybody new comes into the company, as I've said to you guys before, classic one is, you're doing microservices, you should be using monoliths. You are doing monoliths, you should be using microservices. People have their own flavors of doing things, and that is why the ADR is powerful, because if you have that, if you have made a technical decision, you have a little bit of a community of people who have basically put their stamp of approval on that document and said this is official, it becomes much tougher to change that decision. If it's an ad hoc thing where people just sort of talk about it, it becomes easier for these people who want to introduce some type of change that may be good but might not be so good. Like, you basically give them, you put the effort of proving their idea on them instead of them being able to sort of just undo anything that you have done. This is the thing that is important with an ADR. It's similar to the laws, legal things, guys. A law has power because it feels as if it is important. We have an agreement that this thing is how it should be working, and that is just an agreement among us, and there are of course consequences if you break it and so forth, but I hope you sort of see my drift. The thing that makes it special is the fact that it feels special, but at the end of the day, it's just a piece of paper that will either leave you feeling like, yeah, these decisions made sense, or it will just not give you anything whatsoever. And you can basically forget that the ADRs will, as I said, like, documentation is never a substitute for well-structured code. And if you have a poorly documented, if you have a spaghetti code system, it doesn't really matter if you have documentation or not, because the fact that you have spaghetti code means that the documentation will try to describe something that is already most likely so complicated to describe that the documentation is not going to help you that much. You sort of have to just get your hands dirty with it and learn by doing. So what I want you to take away from this is that I do have ADRs for one specific use case, and that is when I need to make something feel official. When I have to present an idea that I need people to align on so that I can rest easy in that they all understand the direction that we are heading. And that's usually a very big thing, such as I said, like if I've made a technical decision, like say a monorepo or something like that I explain, these are the reasons why we did this is the background, we talked about these, it has to feel like we did this quote-unquote official thing, and now it is a quote-unquote official, and as soon as somebody wants to question that, which sometimes happen, you can refer them to the ADR, and if they're really stubborn, they're going to try to fight you on it, but it becomes more difficult for them because you have made sure that you have aligned the people who are there, which means that this thing is more likely to stick. It's much harder for them to sort of just undo it. And this, you see this guy, I've told you this as well, guys. The second, like, no matter how perfect you write your software, no matter how amazing you work, at some point, and I actually said that to my coworker not that long ago, we were working on a product together, it was really well made, I think, at the very least, and it was, at a good level. Then I moved to another team, somebody else with sort of authority or seniority comes into the product and basically undoes everything immediately. And he told me, like, this is just a big waste of time, and I go, yeah, but that is software development. It is exactly the way. Like the software developers will, in general, depending on their maturity level, just undo things that you have already done. That's why you can never future-proof your code. That's why it doesn't matter how perfect you make it, because as soon as it hits somebody else's hands they have a different idea of how to do things, they will just throw it away or mess it up or do something like that. It's the vacation problem. And so the best thing that you can do in order to fix these sort of problems so that you don't have this issue with poorly documented spaghetti code and so forth is not to create an ADR and just try to define everything in documents, because even if you have 100 of those documents, no sane person is going to read all that stuff. It's like you claiming that you always read the agreement when you have to, the legal agreement for everything that you buy online or something like that. You're never going to read that thing, and just as it's too much information, too much of an investment. Therefore, I argue that it's better for you to structure your code so that the things that you, we call it, fall into the pit of success. ADRs is not a way for you to fall into the pit of success. Structuring your code and creating templates for how to do things. In other words, modularizing your code, creating services and templates and so forth that actually creates a physical restriction or a way of where all the interfaces interact in a certain way, or standards within the code where basically if you want to do anything within the code base, you have to either undo everything manually or just continue with the patterns that are already established. That is much more powerful for the low level everyday decisions that you have to make in the code base, whereas ADRs are much more powerful when it comes to making sure that everybody has a shared vision of how do we do certain things in this company. Have a great day.